This sermon series that we've done for Advent, we've looked at the story as a whole, but through different lenses. We looked through the lens of how the Father who planned the whole event saw it. And so when Mike Heisler spoke a couple weeks ago, the timeline was from creation on. Like, it's just this massive plan that God wove together that has this moment where everything works out at Christmas. Last week I looked through the lens of the supernatural and how many miracles and how many just wild events happened and how many strange happenstances that are actually really complicated to pull off happened, as well as the angels, just so much stuff. This week we're going to look through the lens of Joseph. Joseph, Mary, Joseph, the baby, he's kind of in every nativity set. We still have him even for our children's ministry, though we have lost Jesus. If you find him, let me know. But Joe's an interesting guy, because on the one hand, he is crucial to the story. The whole story falls apart without him. On the other hand, we don't know that much about him. We don't know that much about him. One of the things that we learn from Matthew 15, though. In Matthew 13:55, where Jesus is in Nazareth, and the people are talking about Jesus, and they make a reference to Joe. And they say, "Is not this the carpenter's son?" Now they're talking about Jesus, but they're recognizing him in the relationship of community. And this is the verse. This is it. This is how we learn that Joseph was a carpenter. I don't know how he did it. This is a land before power tools. Power tools have progressed a lot. Most of mine run on batteries when I take them to a job site. Power tools take so much of the work out of it. And Joe didn't have any. But he worked in the wood. And every day he worked. Everything took longer. I kind of, in my mind, imagine probably Joe was absolutely ripped. And though I have dressed for the occasion, I did not start working out years ago to demonstrate that part of it. But Joe would have worked with a whole tree to turn it into the beam to hold up the roof of a house. He likely would have done the stonework to set it in as well. The word carpenter, that's correctly translated, but it was used kind of broadly, so he might in fact have been more properly called a builder. Because he may have worked in lots of things, not only wood, but he would have prepared things for the use in the community. As such, he'd have been a guy of decent, upstanding relationship. I cannot actually imagine what it was like for him. Some machine somewhere made this chisel. I didn't have to do the blacksmithing. Theo, I told you it was wet. That didn't happen in rehearsal. No, it didn't. When we meet Joseph, we don't initially know he's a carpenter. That comes later. When we meet him, what we know is that he's betrothed. In Matthew chapter 1, we get the most verses about him. He's betrothed. Now, betrothal, a lot of weddings today will still do a betrothal time. It's that opening part of the time where dad's walked his bride down the aisle. pastor or priest says, "Will you marry this person?" And it still uses future tense because the betrothal was for something that was coming in the future. It was a promise. Now, I suppose in our modern day, the closest thing we have is engagement. And that's about right. I mean, that's about right. The difference being that betrothal involves parents making agreements, there's signed documents, there's money that changes hands. The word in Hebrew is mohar, which roughly translates to bride price, which could be money, might be service. When you read the story of Jacob in the book of Genesis, the bride price is paid in years of service. He works 7 long years. Doesn't get the girl he thought he was paying for. Has to work 7 more years. But the work is tied to a bride price. When we meet Joseph, he's there. The verse is here. Matthew 1, 18 and 19. Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. That's the first verse you encounter Joe. There's a lot going on in that verse. He is betrothed. The promises are made. Everybody signed off on the agreement. Mary's dad signed off on the agreement. The money has either changed hands or it's about to. But they're not living together. There was no cultural acceptability for sex before marriage in that time. They are living apart. They are engaged. Everybody in town knows that they're engaged. But Mary still lives with her parents. Joseph still lives either with his family or on his own. The betrothal period, usually about a year, would have involved things like, if Joe does live with his parents, he's building a place. Jesus' language when he says, "I go to prepare a place for you," is betrothal language. I'm going to go get ready to bring you home. When you read, "I go to prepare a place for you," he is saying, church, you're the bride, I'm the groom, I'm getting ready for you because you're going to have a home. And heaven for us is that exactly. And Joe probably either had one or was actively working on it when the whole world fell apart for him. The text says it so casually. So casually. She was found to be with child. Now I know that there are times when people don't quite make it to their wedding day, still virgins. But I also know for poor Joe, he knew it wasn't his. And for some period of time, Joe knew, my fiancée is pregnant. It's not mine. I don't know what that betrayal felt like. But I bet it was painful. It's an interesting glimpse we get of Joe. He's engaged. The money's changed hands. You know, in some cultures that means the goats are delivered. Right? Like we're deep inside this agreement. There's time that's still waiting, but everything is set in motion already. They're going to get married. And he finds out that she's with child. And I tried to think on it this week. How much betrayal did he feel? How heartbroken? How angry? How does he make sense of that? He's engaged, and his bride-to-be's been unfaithful. And then she's got this crazy story that it was supernatural and like an angel showed up. And I'm like, really? Have you ever thought about how hard that had to have been for him to take? Right. You didn't cheat on me, it just happened supernaturally. I can't imagine. But honestly, because keep in mind, for us, we have a context to imagine that. It's literally this one. He didn't have that yet. Nobody told this story every Christmas. He had never heard of this. She's pregnant. He knows how that works. And he knows it's not his. And I just wonder sometimes how incredibly hard was that. And this is one of the places that we get a glimpse into what a good man Joe is. Joe's in a place where he in anger can absolutely denounce Mary. He can call out, "This isn't mine. I sleep in my house. She doesn't." He can go public. He can go, "This isn't my baby. I'm not responsible. She's been unfaithful." He can publicly denounce her. There's a chance she'll get stoned to death in the streets. And he doesn't do that. And I think it's our first real clue that Joseph's a really good guy. Because he's hurt, he's betrayed, but he's not vengeful. He's not out for her destruction. And the scriptures tell us that he planned to divorce her quietly because he's unwilling to put her to shame. One of the things that for me is always kind of frustrating about the text is there'll be these two verses that are smack next to each other like time didn't happen. Right? She was found to be child and he planned to dismiss her quietly. How long did it take you to work that one out? How many days did he go out and absolutely work himself exhausted trying to figure out, what do I do now? She's betrayed me, she's been unfaithful, I don't really want to kill her. If I call her out publicly, she might die. But I didn't deserve this, and I don't need this, and I was faithful, and I'm waiting, and I'm doing the things, and I've already given the goats to her dad. Like, what's the story here? And I wonder how long it took him. Ooh, it's hard. At some point, he arrives at the conclusion that he's going to dismiss her quietly. Now, as proof that betrothal is much more formal than just an engagement, he's actually got to divorce her to get out of it. He's got to go before some local leaders and he's got to say, I divorce her, I divorce her, I divorce her. He's got to write up the paperwork to do it. It's a pretty official thing. It is public. He can do it quietly and not actually denounce her, but he can't do it privately, right? He can do it quietly, but not truly a private thing. He's got his plan, and one night he goes to sleep. And things get weird for him then. So Matthew 1, starting in verse 20. As he considered these things, and again, we don't know how long that went. As he considered these things, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son. You shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. He now knows she was telling the truth. He may still have some emotion to digest. He now knows she's telling the truth, but there's been some time that's been pretty rough. But he decides to take the angel at his word, to believe both the word of the angel that corroborates the word of Mary, and he does something that is socially really not normal. He doesn't wait for the wedding. He doesn't wait for the end of the proper betrothal time. He goes and immediately gets Mary from her house and moves her into his. The text says, when Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and he took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son. And then he called his name Jesus. By shortcutting the betrothal, what he did for the community is say, that baby's mine. What he did for Mary is saying, I'm going to give you honor, and I'm going to give your baby a name that is honorable, instead of that baby being illegitimate. Instead of you being an unfaithful woman, I'm going to tell the community that this is good. And in doing that, Mary gets honor, but he has to share in her shame. Because in shortcutting the betrothal and bringing her in and marrying her immediately, everybody's going to assume that they had snuck away from their chaperones and been together, and he's at least being honest to claim the baby that's his, right? So he actually loses in that publicly. And he does it. And he moves her in, shortcuts the whole system. I look at that and I just think, it's a pretty good example, men, of how you treat the people you love. I know in our culture, we talk a lot about the toxic side of masculinity. I think Joseph's a pretty good example of how this is supposed to work. He's a righteous man. He's trying to navigate the complexities of life, but he's doing it with honor. And even when he is betrayed and ashamed, he doesn't take the route of vengeance. And then he submits to the word of the Lord, who tells him to do something that will cost him. Because it will cost him shame in that community. He is not the fine, upstanding carpenter in their eyes anymore. But he takes her in. Now that said, it does mean that Jesus now isn't an illegitimate child in the eyes of the community. That's pretty important. Right? There's the risk, if Joseph doesn't play this game right, there's a risk Mary dies and Jesus with her. There's the risk that Jesus is just an ostracized member of the community as an illegitimate child the whole time. Like there's a lot of ways this goes bad. And I see the hand of God tenderly asking a righteous man to do something costly. And I think, I've seen that before. I've seen God ask things of people. Righteous people being asked to do really hard things for the sake of the kingdom. And I see that and I recognize that that's very much how God works. So Joseph takes him in. It's getting close to time for a baby to come along. And Rome interrupts and says, hey, I need you to go to this place for this registry. So he gets to travel with his somewhere in the full-term neighborhood of pregnancy. We always imagine a donkey in the story. I don't know if there's a donkey or not. I wonder what that was like for him. Trying to take care of his wife, take care of a child that's not his, but he's going to claim it as his. While traveling, because the government says so. Theo, what did you give me, man? Look at that, it doesn't give up. They travel. Mary's very obviously pregnant. Right? She's full term. They travel, they get there, baby's born. I've kind of always wondered if Joseph had to serve as a midwife to a woman he's never been with. I don't know how that went. I don't know how that went. It's pretty convenient, though, that Rome decided to call a census, so that this family that lived in Nazareth ended up in Bethlehem, which is where Jesus was supposed to be born the whole time. That's kind of fun. Almost like God was doing stuff. Joseph was responsible, he was righteous, he was devout. After Jesus is born, they take Jesus to the temple. They offer the sacrifice. They go back to Bethlehem for a season. Some strangers show up, some foreigners, and they give gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These are all three very costly gifts. Frankincense and myrrh, there's a rarity of items, there's a refining process, there's more demand than there is supply. So for all of those normal economic reasons, frankincense and myrrh are both very expensive items. We quickly recognize that gold is, but in fact, it's high-ticket item, high-ticket item, high-ticket item. And then Jesus is there, and they've got this thing, and Joseph gets another dream. And in the dream, the angel says, take Mary and the boy and flee to Egypt now. And Joseph obeys. And though I'm pretty sure Joe was a good provider, the crazy foreigners provided for this trip with some gold and some frankincense and some myrrh that they're able to sell to afford the travel and the lodging while they wait out King Herod. Joseph's quick action of waking from that dream and taking his wife and child and fleeing to Egypt saves Jesus' life. And I see that Joseph was quick to obey. That's a really good trait. It's a very good trait in a man. Pretty good trait in a woman, right? Like anybody who's quick to obey the Lord, that's good. But I see that in Joe. And he flees. And they live. And later he gets another dream. Okay, you can go back. He says, okay, honey, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to our hometown. We're going to go all the way back to Nazareth. We know that he's faithful. He provides for their upbringing. They take the trip to Jerusalem every year for the Passover. There's that story where Jesus is about 12, that he disappears from the journey and ends up at the temple. But in that whole story, Joseph's doing what men do. He's providing for his family. He's raising them in the faith. He's working hard. He's staying faithful. And I look at this guy and I go, this guy's got the whole package. Like, this is who I want to be like. This is a model man. And honestly, if we didn't celebrate Christmas every year, and you're just casually reading your Bible, you may or may not remember him. If you didn't decorate your house with a nativity set and put Mary and Joseph and the baby there in the middle and the shepherds on this side and the wise men on this side and the sheep over there, like if you didn't do that every year, you might not know who this guy is. And he's exactly the kind of person that the Lord wants us to be. He's faithful in what God puts before him. He's honorable, but he's also sacrificial. He's devout. He trains up his children. And he's hardworking. I like this guy. Jesus learned from him. How does the Son of God learn anything from a mere mortal? But you see traits just playing out there. Christmas is about the Son of God, who's born in human form. But we get this glimpse of the normal people too. Like I look at Jesus and I'm like, Jesus never sinned. I sure did. Right? Jesus is perfect in all these ways. I'm sure not. But I look at Joe and I'm like, maybe I could be like Joe. And I find myself looking in and going, okay, am I devout like Joe? Am I hardworking like Joe? Am I righteous like Joe? Am I honorable like Joe? All right, this is the guy I want to be like. Because this is the guy that God likes to visit. And that sounds pretty good too. Worship team, I'm going to invite you to come up. We're going to celebrate God. We're going to sing praises to his name. Christmas is about the miraculous. Christmas is also about the mundane. Those days you go to work, you go home, you go to bed tired. Christmas is about normal people being faithful in their daily tasks. May we be more like that.